Once upon a time, there was a little boy named Derek, and Derek was addicted to his iPad. He would get up early. His parents would keep the iPad. Well, they thought they were keeping it in a spot where Derek wouldn't find it, in the middle of the night. But somehow it was like this thing had a power over him, and he could always find it. So he was sleeping very poorly, always on his iPad. He was watching, I don't know, YouTube shorts and cat videos and just all sorts of random things, like people opening packages, unboxing videos. And, it was affecting his sleep. It was affecting his schoolwork. It was even affecting his moods. And whenever his parents would take it away, he would get cranky. And it was just kind of a miserable existence. And they didn't know what to do because his parents were afraid to just ban the iPad altogether, because if they did that, then they didn't know how he would react. His parents were walking on eggshells a little bit around young Derek and his unhealthy relationship to his iPad. So they decided, they had some friends who had sent their child to a summer camp that was a device-free summer camp. And so they decided that they were going to send Derek to Camp Luddite, is what it was called, where there were no devices, very little technology. It was pretty much almost an Amish way of life, very peaceful. So one day at breakfast, they approached Derek and told him, "Derek, we are sending you to camp."
Derek took one look at his parents and was like, "I'm ready. It's time." Derek's parents were a little taken aback and kind of surprised by this reaction. Their kid, who's never without their iPad, is just agreeing to go to Luddite camp, a place where you try to end your use of devices. But Derek was of a different generation than his parents. He realized that, always being on a device, constantly engaged with just yourself instead of your imagination, or maybe your friends, might not be the best way to continue going on. Besides, Derek was only 12. He wasn't even a teenager yet. So Derek packed up his belongings, his clothes, his toothbrush, as well as 2 pairs of shoes, because he had heard that there had been some activities that you do at this camp outside. Kind of like sports, but not like sports. Activities. And as Derek approached Luddite camp, a big sign over an entrance to a forest with a bunch of camp tables and tents and activities like pool. Oh, and beanbag toss. And what's that? A little building in the corner that says the word library. Wait, library? Yes, Derek. Someone told Derek that was a library. A place where you read books. Derek, after settling into Luddite camp, took 1 foot in front of another and approached the library. How do you say it again? Library, Derek. He had approached the library. Inside, he found book after book. It's those things that on an iPad you would touch your finger to and magically there'd be another page. Well, in the real world, they're made out of paper that comes from trees. And that is bound together in a book that was made in a printing press. But I'm going into the history of books. Right now, it's about Derek discovering that these books have ideas and stories that would fill his imagination better than any iPad could. Well, truth be told, you can read books on an iPad, but I'm digressing. This is about Derek finding his imagination.
So as he entered the library and he looked around and he saw all of these books, these different colored books everywhere, he was blown away. And some of the spines of the books were bright red, some were multicolored, some were just black and brown. It was every color you could imagine. He'd never seen anything like it. And immediately, the librarian named Mrs. Reader approached him And she said, "Hello, young man. What's your name?" And he said, "Well, my name's Derek." And she's like, "Well, what brings you to the library here at Camp Luddite?" And he said, "Well, my parents think I have an unhealthy relationship with my screen, with my iPad, and, I'm mature enough to recognize that they may be right, and that's why I'm here, and I've never been to a library." How do you say that?
Library, Derek.
"Thank you. And this is amazing." And she said, "Well, what are you interested in besides your iPad?" And I'm assuming looking at TikTok videos and unboxing videos and YouTube shorts and things like that. What are the things that interest you outside of that little rectangle? And they said, "Well, I heard that you guys have activities here, and that's why I brought an extra pair of shoes. And, maybe I could read some books on some activities that might be interested." She said, "Oh, well, Derek, I have just the section for you." So she led him down a long aisle past tons and tons of books into one section that said activities. And they had books on hopscotch. They had books on candle making. They had books on woodworking. They had books on throwing dice. They had books on just skipping. They had an entire section of books devoted to the lost art of skipping. And he said, "Oh, I've never even heard of half of these things, but hopscotch has a cool ring to it. Like, yeah, can I look at this book on hopscotch?" She said, "Well, of course." So she pulled out an encyclopedia of the history of hopscotch, and she handed it to Derek.
After just a few weeks at Luddite camp, let's be honest, it only takes a few weeks to recover your imagination. Derek had become an expert on hopscotch, but even more so, he had discovered his imagination and now realized that there was a world of activities that were not tied to just your screen time on an iPad. Back home, Derek's parents were really happy. They did new things like hopscotch as a family, or getting fireflies in a glass jar, but we put the screen on top so the fireflies can breathe, while playing hopscotch together as a family. Derek and his parents were really happy, and as his 13th birthday approached, Derek asked his parents, "Listen, as a teenager, I think I should get 4 hours of screen time a night." "Just kidding, Mom and Dad. Let's go play hopscotch."
The end.
Every night before one kid goes to bed, and by kid, I mean put yourself into this. You're the kid. Listen, every night a kid is supposed to have good dreams, right? Right? But what if you don't? There's a word for those dreams. Yeah, I know you're going to say nightmare, but that's not true. Yes, nightmares exist. They're bad and they're scary, but that's not what we're talking about today. Today we're talking about what happens when you don't have a good dream, but you don't have a bad dream. You just have a dream. This happened to this one kid. Yes, it's still kind of you in the story, but for this time, we're going to give this kid a name. Randy was a kid, 8 years old, lived in Wheattown, Illinois. You know, it was Wheattown because they grew a lot of corn. No, I'm kidding. It was wheat. Wheattown grew a lot of wheat. And Randy lived there with his family, and his family was fine. They were great. They were wonderful. They were supportive. But Randy still wondered why he wouldn't always have a good dream, and sometimes he'd have a bad dream. Remember the nightmares. But what happened when he just had a dream that was just a dream? And Randy was a kid who was a dreamer. See, there's more than one kind of dream. You have the dreams you have when you fall asleep at night, and you also have the dreams that you have when you're awake. Daydreams. Randy was a daydreamer and dreamed about things that he wanted to do when he was growing up, like becoming a scientist, or a pilot, or a mechanical engineer, or someone who worked in logistics for an electric vehicle company. You could do anything you want, just like Randy. Remember, he's a kid, you're a kid. But Randy sometimes wondered why he didn't always have good dreams if he just had a regular dream. So he asked his parents about this, and through their open lines of communication, they all talked about the fact that, well, Randy, you're very young. You don't have to know what you want to be when you grow up just right now. Just have some dreams. So Randy went back to bed that night thinking, all right, then I don't have to decide what I'm going to have, so how about a good dream? But one night, after a few nights of stressing and worrying about his dreams, Randy ended up having the craziest dream of his life. It started with Randy walking through the halls of his school, except his school was in the clouds, but it was safe. Everything was bouncy and cloudy, because it was the clouds. And Randy went outside and saw, instead of a football or soccer or baseball field, there were just open fields of clouds. And instead of any cats or dogs or any land animals, all you could see were birds. Birds everywhere. Eagles, pigeons, wrens, even a red-breasted robin. The red-breasted robin came right up to Randy and said, "Hi, Randy. Welcome to your dream." Randy forgot that he was even in a dream. He thought he had just actually gone to school up in the clouds. Randy said hello back to the robin, and without knowing what would happen next, that robin had scooped up Randy onto their back and started flying around with Randy right on their back. Wow. Randy realized that this dream was wonderful. This was a space where Randy could finally see that anything could be possible if you just kind of let go in your imagination. That's what it was, wasn't it? Randy was finally letting his dream take him where any imagination could. Randy actually just woke up. Wow, that had been the craziest dream of their life. Randy decided to write down that dream too. In the morning at breakfast, he read aloud his dream to his parents. Everyone laughed at the robin picking up Randy and taking them around the playing fields, which were still the clouds in the sky. Randy's dad asked him, "Randy, what do you think you're going to dream about tonight?" Randy couldn't wait to get to sleep that night. After a full day of school and some chores and, tonight was tuna salad night for dinner. After all that, Randy got ready for bed and finally turned off their light and was asleep before you could finish the end of this sentence. Randy was having another crazy dream, because that's the thing, kids. The next dream you have might be crazier than the dream you've had the night before. But this time, Randy's dream didn't seem to be crazy as in fun and light as before. This dream was feeling a little dark and a little scary. Uh-oh, there's some thunder. Ugh, lightning. What? But why is it happening in my room? Oh, and that's when Randy realized that they were in another dream. See, this was one of those nightmares, kids. They happen, but sometimes when you realize that you are in a dream, they don't seem so bad or scary now, do they? Randy woke up and, just like the night before, wrote down his dream. He read it to his parents, and his mom said, "Wow, Randy, you had a crazy fun dream, and now that was a nightmare." See, it happens sometimes. Both dreams, good and bad, can happen. Randy went to bed that night having another dream and woke up and wrote everything that happened in that wonderful dream down. And then the next night, Randy, before they knew it, had had a whole journal, a diary full of dreams, funny and scary, good and bad, sometimes with talking birds and talking beds, and other times just like they were out of an old black and white movie. You know, the kind that your grandparents or your great-grandparents used to watch when they were your age. Randy kept writing and writing down his dreams over the years. Before you knew it, Randy had graduated from college and gone to school to be a writer. You know, those folks that write down the stories and ideas and dreams that we have. All those years worrying about what their dreams would be. Would they be funny? Would they be scary? Would they happen while I'm awake? Would they happen while I'm asleep? Had kind of given Randy their dream job in life. To be a writer, a storyteller. And Randy started writing down the things that he knew best, his own dreams. Because kids, all of us, you, me, every one of us have dreams. We have imaginations. It's nice to remember them. And if you forget them, you can always write them down, just like Randy did. Because before you know it, you might have your own dream journal and a book of stories and ideas that everyone wants to read, or maybe even see as a movie or TV show on their screens. But remember to check in with your parents for how many hours you can actually watch on those screens. Randy went to bed that night with a little smile on his face and couldn't wait to write down the next dream he would have in the morning. With one yawn, he was asleep. The end.
Once upon a time, there was a young Viking boy named Sven. And Sven was a very small Viking, and most of the Vikings are very large. They're strong men. They wield axes and swords, and they wear these big helmets with horns, and they wear these wonderful capes with furs, and they go out and they do all the Viking stuff. And most of that is not appropriate for a children's story. But they would have these contests of strength in downtimes when the Vikings were not at war with other Vikings. And Sven would always come in last in these strength contests. And it was really demoralizing for him. He had 4 brothers and 3 sisters, and they were all stronger than he was. They could throw the axe farther, they could twirl a sword faster, they could swim farther. He was just coming up short in all of these contests that they would have. And every summer, on the summer solstice, they would have basically like a Viking Olympics. And leading up to that, Sven was determined to win at least one event, even though he wasn't the biggest Viking in the tribe or in the group or in the clan, whatever they Vikings call themselves. He was determined to win one event. And so one day he approached the Viking elder named Olaf, and he asked Olaf to train him.
Olaf looked at him, and look, Sven is a very small little Viking. And Olaf, at first, what would I train you to do? You're minuscule. You have no upper arm strength whatsoever. One of your siblings, sure, yeah, I could train them, but no, I don't think so. So Sven was like, please, I'll do anything to get you to train me. And Olaf was like, okay, fine. I'll train you, but only if you go. And there's a gem I've had my eyes on, a very special gem, but it's at the very, very top of this mountain. So in order to get to this gem, you're going to have to swim across this big river. You're going to have to climb this mountain in the cold, and you have to go deep into this cave to get this gem for me. It's one I've been thinking about for a long time. And if you bring me back that gem, I will train you. So Sven is like, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it because this is the only way I'm going to win these Summer Olympics. So he goes off on his own, heads towards this mountain. And first he arrives at this giant river, and the river's like crazy. It's full of electric eels. The waves are just going all over the place. And Sven is really smart. And at first was like, maybe I'm going to make a raft. And so he builds this raft, But what he forgot about is not only there are electric eels, there are also piranhas in this water. And he gets in the water and these piranhas start to come up. And he's like, oh no, I have no choice. I'm going to have to swim across the water. And he does. And he swims as fast as he can. And he eventually makes it. He makes it to the other side of the river.
And at the other side of the river, he looked up towards the top of the mountain. And as he was looking up, dark clouds started to move in. And the temperature dropped a good 20 degrees. And he had just come out of the water, and it wasn't warm water. These were actually very rare cold water piranhas that thrived in Scandinavia that a lot of people don't know about, but they're there. So he was shivering, and he knew that he wasn't going to make it up to the top of the mountain that day. He knew he needed shelter for the night. So he went on a walk along the shore, and he came upon a hut. And it was a fairly primitive hut made of earth and clay and straw, but there was smoke coming out of it. And so it was a sophisticated enough hut where you could have a fire inside and not burn the whole thing down. And so he felt like this might be a good option. Maybe whoever lives in this hut could help me get warm for the night, help get me fed so that tomorrow morning I can continue my journey on to find this gem for Olaf. So he approached the door of the hut, and he was nervous. He took a deep breath because he didn't know who he was going to find on the other side of this door, whether they were going to be friendly or not, but he didn't really have any options at this point. He knocked on the door, and the door slowly creaked open. And on the other side of that door was a little girl named Tiffany, which she was like, that's an odd name for this region, but sure, Tiffany. And Tiffany invited him in.
And he was cold, as you remember, freezing. So she immediately said, would you like some tea? The number one thing that will warm you up when you're cold. It's always what you should have when you're cold. And also, maybe not as a drink of this region, so he didn't know what that was. And she was like, oh, you put leaves and water in hot water. And he was very impressed by that and felt a lot warmer. And she gave him some nice, warm, animal-based clothing to wear. He started feeling a lot better, and he was like, what are you doing here? You live at the base of this giant mountain, on the other side of the eel and piranha river. What are you doing here? And she said, one time I really wanted a favor from this man named Olaf, and he sent me this way. And I got here and I crossed the river. I was supposed to go get this gem, and, all this is ringing true to Sven. I crossed the river and it was scary, but I got here, and then I looked up and I said, that mountain is very big. I just don't know if I can make it. So I ended up living in this hut. In this earthen hut, which is a really nice home. I mean, it's cozy, it's warm. I don't have to worry about much. And, I never did get my favor from Olaf, but I'm happy here. I'm happy here on this, in this little hut. And Sven was like, what was the favor that you wanted? And Tiffany said she had always wanted to have a little bit of magic. She wanted to be slightly magical. Yeah, there's magic in this world. Spoiler. She always wanted to be able to levitate just a little bit. And Olaf was going to help her, but she had to go get this gem, and she ended up giving up and just hanging out in this hut instead. And of course, Sven is like, I'm going on this same adventure. Maybe you could come with me. We could go together. And Tiffany's like, that sounds very scary. I'm not sure I can make it. I feel like much more comfortable in this earthen hut that I've made. I cook an eel for dinner every night. I melt some snow and drink that. I'm living a pretty great life. And he tells her to think about it. Wait till tomorrow and see how things go. Maybe she could come with him, or maybe he'll stay here, maybe this is a pretty nice life. So he goes to sleep in this warm, nice hut, and wakes up the next morning, and it's beautiful, and it's gotten a little bit warmer.
And Tiffany makes him a really nice breakfast little eel schmear on toast, and he washes it down with some tea. And he looks at her, and she looks at him, and he says, well, I'm off to retrieve Olaf's gem. Would you like to come with me? And she sighed, and she took a sip of her tea and a little bite of eel. And she said, "You know what, Sven? I think I'm happy here, but if you get into any trouble on your journey, you know where to find me, and I'll be here to help you." He said, "Okay, you sure?" And she said, "Yeah, I'm sure." So Sven set out towards the mountain, and he climbed, and he climbed. And boy, this was a steep mountain. But luckily he was small. And for as small as he was, he had pretty decent strength. He was spry. He wasn't like a little weakling. He was just a smaller Viking than the standard Viking. So he was able to kind of scramble up these rock faces pretty fluidly. And he would stop, he'd take some breaks. And it was starting to get dark, and he was close to the top of the mountain. And he climbed and climbed. He got towards the top, and he saw a very small Sven-size opening in the mountain. No other Viking could have ever gotten in that. And then he thought, oh, that's Olaf's deal, is he tries to convince these little Vikings to go get this gem for him because none of these other Vikings can do this. And then he thought about Tiffany, and he thought about her happy life she has just here hanging out by the mountain, eating eel and just drinking tea. It all sort of dawned on him that Olaf was just kind of using him for this gem. And he was like, I don't really think this dude's gonna train me. And if Tiffany had found the gem, he was like, I don't really think he would have helped her levitate. Like, he just sort of got suspicious of this whole thing. And he's like, I'm just doing this old man's bidding. But he still wanted to see the gem. He wanted to see it for himself. So he kept climbing, and he got up and he peeked inside this crevasse. And from within the crevasse, it was glowing. It was this glowing green, this emerald. And he thought, wow, this is amazing. This is the most beautiful gem I've ever seen. And boy, Olaf is sure going to be disappointed when I don't bring it back and decide to spend the rest of my days with my new friend Tiffany. And so that's what he did. He climbed back down that mountain, and he knocked on her door again with no gem in hand. And she had a hot cup of tea waiting for him and some fresh eels right out of the Eel and Piranha River. And they had a wonderful meal. And it was the first of many, because they lived happily ever after. The end.
So there was once a little girl. Her name was Tiffany. And she loved playing games. Any sort of game. Someone would say, hey, you want to play hopscotch? She is like, yes. Someone said, you want to play dodgeball? She loved that. Board games, she was also into those. She loved the old ones, you know, Clue. There was one from the 80s she loved called Mall Madness, which I won't get into what that was about, but it involves shopping. Uno was probably her favorite game. That's a card game. And it wasn't that complicated, and it had a lot to do with luck. Tiffany was very lucky. And that was what she liked about games, is that she had a lot of skills. Like, she was pretty athletic. She could run pretty fast. But really, she thought of herself as very lucky. She was at school one day, and her teacher told them that they were going to play a game, a new kind of game. And this game was to see who was the luckiest. What kind of school is she going to? I'm not really sure, but because this was a weird request, right? The school was for gifted kids, but the teachers were extraordinary, and they were looking for extraordinary students. So they said, today we are going to see who is lucky. And Tiffany, we know you think you're a lucky girl. So we want everyone to go outside, and the game is who can find the first 4-leaf clover. And so Tiffany is excited. You know, she loves games. She thinks she's very lucky. This is all very up her alley. She's set up for success here. So the teacher says, on your mark, get set, go. And Tiffany, and there's about 15 kids in the class, they all run outside, and they're very excited. But unfortunately, they run outside, and the first thing they realize is that it's the middle of summer, and there are no clovers. There's no clover at all outside. The grass is kind of dead. There's a place where you can jump in the sand. There's dirt. There's a gravel parking lot, but there's no clover. So Tiffany was like, what are we supposed to do? And some of the other kids said, Tiffany, what do we do? We're not gonna be able to find a clover. none of us are going to be successful. This game is too hard. And Tiffany was like, this game is too hard. But then she remembered that not too far away, there was a place that there might be a 4-leaf clover. There was a nice big garden, public garden, big park. So Tiffany, she grabbed her 2 best friends, and their names were Sam and Silas. Sam was a girl, it's short for Samantha. Sam, Silas, and Tiffany, they decide they're going to go to this garden because they have to win this game. They have to be the luckiest kids in the class. So they set off on this trip to the garden, and they know that it's across town. It's kind of far. They're not supposed to go anywhere without parental permission, but the teacher said it was okay. So they went. And they make their way to this giant garden. And the garden is kind of extraordinary. The garden, it has a giant waterfall. It's got like a river running through it. It is this beautiful place. It is, some of it is Japanese themed. Some of it is like an arid desert. It's just this giant place with all sorts of different elements from around the world. And they're like, we know there must be a 4-leaf clover here somewhere. So they have to think, like, where, if this has something from everywhere in the world, there's like a desert, there's, like I said, a river, there's all sorts of places. Where would we find a clover in all of this? What parts of the world have clovers? And they really had to think about it, which I'm doing right now. And they thought, what about Ireland? Maybe there's a section of this garden that is themed like Ireland, because that is where you find 4-leaf clovers, because they love luck in Ireland. So they used a map, and they found where the section of the garden that looked like Ireland was. And they arrived there, and wow, let me tell you, it was a sight to see. It was beautiful rolling hills. It was somehow a view of the ocean. This was a very special place. And they looked around and they said, oh, there is clover here. They found a bunch of clover, and they start looking, like counting the clover. Which one is 4 leaves? This one has 3. This one has 5, None of them have 4 leaves, which is what they need. Tiffany is wandering through when suddenly her friend Silas calls out and he says, I think I found it. I found a 4-leaf clover. And he holds it above his head. And Tiffany is like, at first, a little worried. She thought she would find it, but it's her friend. So she's happy for him. And the moment he picks it, a leprechaun appears out of nowhere. And the leprechaun, they love 4-leaf clovers and they love luck. That's their big thing. They have a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. It's not really relevant to what's happening here. But the leprechaun appears and says, Silas, you found this. I'm going to give you even more luck. Who do you want to share it with? And he says Tiffany and also Sam, which was very sweet. And not only that, but he said, I'm going to send you back to your school. You don't have to walk across the city again. I'm going to magically send you back to your school with lots of luck. And so he did. And they arrived back, and the 3 of them shared. And Silas said, thank you, Tiffany, for taking me on that adventure. And Tiffany said, thank you for sharing your 4-leaf clover with me. Because at the end of the day, friendship is the most important. The end.